Okay, great. All right. Well, hello, everyone. This is Michelle Reyes from the Asian American Christian Collaborative, and I have the honor of talking with Michelle Warren today. Michelle Warren, thank you so much for just, making some time to talk with me and talk about everything related to faith and politics. I'm thrilled to be talking with
well,
you.
thank you. I'm excited to be here, everybody. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to have such an important and timely conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we've connected in the past, both being in the CCDA world, and my husband and I were the local. I'm the local CCDA networker for Austin, Texas. But for those who don't know you as well, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself and your work with CCDA and elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Advocacy and Strategic Engagement Director for CCDA. I've been with CCDA formally as a staff member for the last 8 years, but I actually have been a part of CCDA since the 90s. My husband and I were actually living out a philosophy of ministry that is congruent with CCDA, but hadn't even heard about CCDA. So it's interesting. I started living out the philosophy in 93 very aggressively, and then met CCDA in 95. I'm just so grateful for the wisdom and the experience, and then also so many invitations for when I was younger, and then now, of course, younger people like yourself and your husband and others to really join a collective chorus of how we want to work with integrity and solidarity among the poor. The Christian Community Development Association, for those people who don't know, is a national association that is housed around a certain philosophy. You can go on ccda.org to learn about the 8 key components, but it's not the only philosophy of ministry to the poor, but it is definitely one that I am grateful to have invested nearly 30 years of living and doing ministry in, and I'm grateful to be able to work alongside leaders like yourself, Michelle.
Oh, awesome. Well, can you tell us a little bit about, well, I have so many questions. I mean, your book, such a formative book, The Power of Proximity, and it's something that my own church that we've read because, we are in a low-income disadvantaged community serving largely the minority poor and largely immigrant population and just living proximate to those who are experiencing injustice. So I'd love to hear more about your book and even about your political campaign, if you can share about that.
Well, that might be like the whole gamut, right? Because the book starts in when I'm in the early 20s, and now I'm almost 50. So there's a lot here.
Yeah.
Well, what I didn't do is I talked a little bit about I'm usually the most political person anybody knows. I haven't found too many people who are more political than I am. And it's something that I've had to really grow into. I don't know if I ever thought I was going to get into politics. If you had told me when I was younger, I don't know what I would have said, but I definitely was not setting myself up for this particular trajectory. I just wanted, like my book shares, I wanted to live with integrity. As I did ministry among the poor, and this idea of driving in and out and living separate lives would not only just accent the privilege that I came from, but it would also sustain it in a way that would leave me detached from the injustice and the oppression and the lack of privilege that the poor in our country have. And global poverty is a whole different conversation, but just United States poverty. And for me, it has always been lived out in an urban setting, which means it's predominantly with people of color. So we have a lot of poor people in our country, but the rural poor are mostly white. I shouldn't say mostly, there's just a high majority of white people that are in the urban poor and the rural poor. But when you're in urban settings, most of your community, in poor communities, are people of color. And that is where I've lived in the same community for 24 years. Same house, 23 years, and it is an immigrant community. And I, like I said, didn't think I'd get into politics, never thought I'd write a book. I just was trying to be a good neighbor. And a lot of times I was just trying to figure out what being a good neighbor was, because it was so different from my cultural context. And just really am grateful for all the years living alongside people. But when you have a front row seat to injustice and oppression, and you truly love each other as neighbors, there is no way that you can back down when you have an opportunity to engage that injustice. I'm not content with a lack of restoration. The whole premise of the gospel is that God is always working to restore and redeem, what is broken as he draws us to himself. And it's not just about an individual righteousness. It's about this collective good of justice. That's the whole principle of justice, is it's not okay if me and my family do well, if everybody is left behind. And so when you begin to ask the questions of why are we not doing well? What is making us sick mentally, emotionally, physically? Spiritually is important, but it's not the holistic person. And God cares about the whole person and the whole world. And we need to make sure we pay attention to that. So yeah, I just started to navigate into, hey, this isn't right. We need to be a part of changing these systems together and really lifting up the voices of people who are the closest to the pain. And long story short, I realized that there was this cultural line, don't get involved in politics. That's a very privileged, statement. You don't get involved in politics if the system works for you. And as people of faith in the church, that's another thing that's sort of bombarding this cultural narrative. You shouldn't bring politics in the church. If you love your neighbor and your neighbor is inhibited by a system that only the political sphere can really take down, and you're not willing to do it, then I would say, how much do you really love your neighbor? So those questions of how systems are broken and what my role in it, in loving my neighbor, has really been a very gradual trajectory from local community organizing, statewide policy work. And then I've been on the national scene about 10 years, working to build coalitions around really important issues. Immigration reform is definitely one of them. And so I'll just finish this question, because it was a big question. I mean, I'm trying really hard to give you a short answer for the last 30 years of my life.
3 parts, yeah.
Yeah. So I am asked all the time, why did I run for United States Senate? And some of it is that was the position. I mean, I love national politics and public policy, and there's not that many people who love it and are really good at it. And I'm a very strategic political person, and so that is where I like to sink my teeth in, is in those big 1,400-page bills and building coalitions of support. But that aside, I could not continue to go to the border and hold another migrant child, to march in yet another community effort against housing injustice, racial injustice, immigrant injustice. I mean, I could list on and on and on. I couldn't do it anymore. I've been doing it for so many years. And when you do it and you bring it to your leaders, for me, it was the Colorado delegation. We have 7 House members and 2 senators, and you continue to bring coalitions of support that are huge, that are diverse, that represent conservatives and liberals and everybody in between. And you show how clearly the system is not only broken, but is directly harming and literally killing people. And they literally don't do anything with what you're bringing them. This isn't a representative government, and you need to go. So I literally am running against an incumbent senator that I have met with for years. Before he was a senator, I met with him in the House. And I am just so tired of such bad representation and people who are in office that care more about political power and ego than they actually care about serving and representing people, which is the entire purpose of Congress.
I love it. I love it. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. I have so many more questions, and I'm going to ask some more political questions, but I want to just take a step back for a second, because, everything that you're sharing and your book and your work with CCDA, you have a love for your neighbor. I mean, that's very evident in your ministry and work. And we at AACC are so grateful for just your support of the statement on anti-Asian racism, for signing it. And I just would love to hear more of why you signed it, and your desire and heart to be a friend and support to the Asian American community, specifically during this time.
Yeah. Well, I think that your statement was very timely in the almost global response, right? We know a lot about the American response, and what we continue to even hear our president continue to talk about COVID-19 as though it was a China or Chinese virus. Yeah. And even when told, I mean, if we had a president who wasn't social media savvy, maybe we could give him more grace, but very, very aware that he was doing harm by creating to perpetuate an anti-Asian racist statement. Your statement was a good, timely response, not just as a Christian, but as an American. Like, we have a very sordid history with the Asian American community in our public policies, which if we have time, I'd be happy to talk about. So one, of course I signed, because what else could I do? There was limit. We're very limited in what we can do right now, as far as inside, outside the house. And this wasn't a flash in the pan news thing. This is continuing on and on. And also, I was also seeing friends in the Asian American community talk about how they were being mistreated at a grocery store or the gas station. I was just like, this is just so not okay. So one, it was just the moment. Of course I would sign it. I agree with all of its tenets, and I've been an ally and an accomplice, in racial injustice across the board. But I wouldn't have known about it, because you guys didn't launch it, had Kathy Kong not, she's a friend of mine, and said, would you be willing to sign it? And I was so grateful. And of course, being a part of CCDA, and Christina Four, beautiful Asian American fierce woman who works alongside of me, said, can we put this out? And so I got to read it before you launched it, and was so happy to sign it and be able to use whatever platforms we had at CCDA, but also if my name was helpful. And I, of course, asked people to sign it. So I signed it because I'm an ally, because I'm an accomplice, because of the moment in our history that demanded a response. And I thought it was an appropriate response, a very appropriate response. And I hope it digs in and does more, because I think moments have a way of revealing serious issues that we need to address. And so easy decision. Obviously, a close personal friend told me about it, happy to sign, but also just my own recognition. It's not a hard sell for me to see that we are racist in our responses, and that it's a very human response, but it's a wrong response. And we need to undo that harm, or that dark, that darkness that is just in humanity that we see literally at the beginning of creation. We've only got Adam and Eve on the scene, and a serpent that's basically Adam and Eve. You're going to want to be in charge and dominate, and she's going to want to, there's this back and forth. And then you see everything that was right became wrong, at that moment in history. And then what Christ was supposed to set right, we at the church have just not gotten right. And it happened in the early church. You've got Pentecost, where now the Holy Spirit is uniting and healing and giving us the agent of comfort and restoration and reconciliation, in that ministry of reconciliation. And we didn't get it then either. When I say we, humanity, and you see Paul in Galatians, it's like coming out of his skin, like, you dumb, stupid Galatians, which he could have inserted anybody.
Yeah.
How are you so foolish? Foolish. That's a really strong word in the Bible, to be a fool. You foolish Galatians, don't you know that we're all one? That, Jew, Gentile, rich, poor, I'm trying to think, male, female, male, female, that gender and culture and race and socioeconomic status is not a factor to our value, our dignity, our worth. And it should not be something that keeps us from moving forward.
Yeah. Amen. That's so good. So good. And you did mention something that I wanted to come back to. You said that America has a sordid history in terms of anti-Asian policies, and it's true. And one of the things that we're wanting to do at AACC is just to have that educational piece, because people don't know each other's stories and each other's histories. But would you want to speak into that a little bit in terms of like the history of anti-Asian policies? Because I think that's an important piece that many people don't know.
Yeah, I think, just the whole human side, this is pre-America, kind of goes back to that beginning, and, the beginning of when everything that was right became wrong. But you even see it through the New Testament where, don't favor somebody, because of the way they look or the wealth. Don't be impressed with that. Don't give them a better seat. Because humanity decides what they want to value and what they don't want to value. And a lot of it is by wealth and who has the money and who can. Sorry, I have a hair somewhere and it's distracting me. I wish I could stop.
That's the
stop
worst.
Recording it. I know, I'm going to inhale it. It's not good. Okay. All right. I am safe.
We have a fantastic, and look there, my computer just went. We have a fantastic tech team who will edit this.
Oh, good. Me
yes.
spitting out my hair. Okay, then I will be happy to be funny about it. Okay, so back to what I was saying.
Yeah.
We have this human nature to value and devalue, and often it has to do with money, and it has to do with gender. And the rich guy is going to get more honor than the poor woman and anybody else, right? And I think that's really important because in the United States, racism, the social construct, the struggle that we have in our country as such a deep original sin, some of the reason I think that it was even allowed to fester in the way that it was is that so many people were coming in to, I guess, settle it. And the whole crime of stealing other people's land, the whole conversation about indigenous people and colonization in general, but it wasn't just a colony of one nation. It was like everybody was sort of coming in. And then there was the next wave of laborers to try to build. And so on the East Coast, you talk a lot about, the Italian Americans and the Jewish Eastern Europeans and just a lot of the poor treatment they had. But on the West Coast, it was Chinese, and it was in some of those same times. So Chinese people were coming from China to the United States because we needed labor. And it is very easy for immigrants to be perceived, not just every immigrant, to be perceived as, oh, you must not be very smart because you don't speak our language. And when you do have limited language skills, you are kind of left out of things. And I mean, I've experienced that as an English speaker, and sometimes even in my own neighborhood. I mean, that's just part of it, but that doesn't mean that someone's value is less or their contribution. And so all these people coming in through California doing work that they can do because you don't need strong language skills, right? And they're mining gold, and they're working on the Transcontinental Railroad. And then the gold rush kind of died down by 1860. Nobody was doing anything with that. And then the Transcontinental Railroad, I think the golden spike was, I think, like right around 1870, I think. And so that was sort of the end. And if you think of just the timeline, okay, so now we're at 1870, and there's a lot of Chinese people, and people are coming, and we don't have any federal regulation on any immigrants. And there happened to be a presidential election. I won't get into all the different politics of it, but that very first piece of legislation that would regulate any immigration was literally racist in nature, which was in 1882. It was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which meant that anybody except the Chinese could be here. And we didn't really have anything until the mid-20s, in 1920s, that would have started to bar anybody else. And so you see this very, very strong anti-Asian, really, but anti-Chinese particular bill. And there's a backdrop happening in the East and the Southeast around a similar time, right? I think the Civil War was over around 1865. So we've had this huge slave trade for hundreds of years, devaluing human dignity, the level of work, selling people as commodities. The Chinese migration wasn't quite in the same, obviously, at all on slavery, but we were treating their contribution and their value as less than. We were continuing to, we were starting to build a narrative from the African American slave industry. Now we're moving to viewing Chinese. There's so many of them, and this American narrative that says we want your work, we just don't want you. So how can we create policies that we get to benefit from them, but we exclude your value, your human dignity? And so that was the beginning. It actually wasn't until 2011 that Congress actually apologized for that law.
Wow.
Now, I truly believe that there can be no racial justice in the United States without reparations. That makes me a very unpopular person, but I don't care. Because we have attached financial wealth towards the value of people, and the very fact that African Americans built our country, the Southeast, and they have no inheritance per se from what they've sown. And we know that. We as a country know it was wrong, and apology isn't going to be enough.
Yes.
The African American community, of course, knows that.
Mm-hmm.
But in the heart, I can't speak for all white people, but I'm being a white woman and being in those circles, and we know it's wrong. We know it was wrong. We know we owe something, but there's so many issues with white guilt and the inability to move from white fragility to an actual good placement of where a white person belongs in racial justice. I mean, that should probably be my next career, but I don't know if I have the patience. I don't know if the patience for it. But anyway, just to say that even as Congress continues to hear that, there's a House bill that gets put up every 2 years. So every 2 years, the House of Representatives turns over. And, we saw Representative Cornyn many years ago bring up HR 40, and now he's moved on. I know it's an African-American woman. I can't remember what her name is. I wish I could look it up, but I'm on a podcast, so I can't. But she in his retirement has since brought it up. And HR 40 really is just a bill that would finance the study of what reparations would look like for the African-American community, and it never passes into law. I was just like, we know it's wrong. We know that we owe a great debt and we need to pay that debt, but we won't even study the debt because we don't want to be honest about what's going on. So I don't think that we can have racial justice without reparations. And the very fact that Congress has yet to pass HR 40, and I'll tell you, it's always got the number 40 because of the 40 acres and a mule. And that's sort of a historical story. Anyway, I'll just say that's not necessarily anti-Asian sentiment, but I think it's an important time in history because that was happening right before the Chinese Exclusion Act, during some of the same times as the gold rush, the golden spike. And then we go into the 1900s and you think we'd all learn our lesson. So now we're watching, we had seen anti-Semitism, but after World War II and what happened with the Holocaust, there was no place for it, as there should not have been. But the United States kind of grew up and through that experience realized this is not okay. And you see, it's not that you don't ever see any of it, but you definitely see the trend away from that being okay. And I think World War II, you've got this huge backdrop now. It's with the Japanese. Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and now all of our Japanese immigrants and Japanese American immigrants are under suspect. We didn't do that to Germans, that started this all, but we've now have moving, to Japanese internment camps, where for several years during World War II, people didn't just leave their home and have to be treated like prisoners, but they had nothing to return to. The Americans took their land, took their businesses, and there was no reparations, there was no way to come out of the internment camp and for have it to be set right. And the apologies, and there was a little bit of reparations, probably, I would say probably not enough, but at least an admission through, I think it was the Civil Liberties Act under Ronald Reagan, I think it was in '88, where there was a bill that said we'll give each family that was impacted $20,000. And, and so just to say that we have this history of, and there's probably a lot more stories, but I don't want to take all of those times, but those are important things to know, that sorry isn't enough, that we need to undo harm. And one of the ways we repair and undo harm is through reparations. And I know that in the Christian world, especially the white Christian world, we're so uncomfortable with the concept of race and racism. And, we don't even want to navigate into it. And this idea, reparations, is going to cost us something. Yes, it's going to cost us something. And people at the end of the day are going to have to ask, is it just white guilt that keeps you just feeling sad and sorry about how white people are? Or are you willing to sort of buck up, grow up, and join and recognize that there is a history that we've benefited from as white people and that we need to make it right through even financial incentives? So those are just some policy ways. And money's not going to set everything right. Don't get me wrong. But when you have to go through the work of humbling and listening to the wrong and really be a part of listening to how to repair and make it right, then there's true healing.
Yeah.
And so when statements like our president has made about, the Chinese virus, it's just more of the same. And I don't even mean just from him. He's a symptom of a great problem. He didn't invent anti-Asian sentiment. It's been alive and well for hundreds of years in our country.
Yeah.
And it's what I appreciated, of course, in your statement was it didn't just address, Asian American. There's a serious racial divide in our country. And I think Black Lives Matter actually did a lot of good in helping really create the reality of truth, because you're not gonna, it's not about being nice to people of color. It's so deep, and it is the value and the human dignity of people, and just the rights, the human rights that people should have. And then as Christians, justice is restoring a person to their productive place, or whole communities to their productive place. We never even stop and think about that. We often, almost exclusively, think about justice in a punitive light. And for those people like myself who talk about the restorative, it's like you're speaking a foreign language. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, and you must be a liberal. I don't have to listen to you. But justice is a biblical word. And justice, when you see it even played out in the law of the Old Testament, and you see it through even the heart of Christ, and even through James, that there's opportunities and there's consequences that help restore people. And I think Kohlberg did a really great job in his stages of moral development to help understand the levels of why we choose what's good, why we choose what's wrong, and how we really can be a more just people.
Yeah. Amen. Oh, Michelle, everything you're saying is like gold. I have like a million more questions, but I wanna ask two pointed questions that hopefully are like two sides of the same coin. And one, because you're right, we're like right now we're addressing anti-Asian racism, but we're passionate about addressing anti-racism work and resources and policies as a whole, because you're right, things like reparations aren't going to happen unless there are policies in effect to make that happen. So my first question is, what could a policy, or what could policies on anti-Asian racism, anti-racism look like right now? What kind of steps need to be taken to make that a reality? And then the second part of that is, why does the church need to care about this? Like, why do Christians need to be involved in these sorts of conversations?
Yeah, well, Christians need to care about it because anything that is racist slaps the face of the heart of God, who created everyone in his image. And they reflect his image and his beauty and his artistry and what he deems valuable. And when we exclude our love, our care, our concern for people because they're poor, or because they're, just some of the ways we refer to people. I'll even use a white term. The fact that there would be white trash that slaps the face of Christ. It slaps the face of the value and worth and human dignity. It's not funny. I was thinking, I don't know what made me think about this, but I'm not a funny person. I want to be a funny person. Sometimes I can say things that are funny, but I just am not. And I'm not the first one to come up with jokes or anything like that. But I do remember the only jokes that I had learned as a kid, and this is in elementary school, were jokes about Helen Keller and jokes about Polish people. That was it. That was my repertoire when I was like in 3rd, 4th grade. That's what was happening, is we think it's funny to make fun of blind, deaf, and mute people. Like, I didn't create these jokes. I was just repeating what I was hearing. We think it's funny to say, well, that's a dumb Polak joke. These are enormously insightful, that this is serious stuff. This isn't funny. And Christians shouldn't take a break and say, oh, well, Michelle, I have a sense of humor. I think it's okay. No, it's not okay. It's never okay. Never okay to devalue a person in their worth and their dignity. Yeah. And so that's just an easy one. But Christians are sloppy, and they are so entwined with the wrong side of the cultural coin that they defend and justify putting people down. And, there's a lot to be said about that, but that's not my expertise. That's just my experience. And then you asked me about policies. So, I mean, I've talked a little bit about HR 40. I think it's embarrassing that we haven't passed it. And I'll just tell you, with 535 seats in Congress, only 127 of them total are women. That's a problem. And they're pretty much all white men. So if you're going to want different laws, then you're going to have to elect different people. So that's one thing. I mean, no Christian wants to hear that probably. They don't like that either. I've learned, especially as I've been running. So that's one piece. But I will say that there are a lot of laws on the books that perpetuate racism and lack of access. And I remember hearing a speaker at CCD, I won't mention who it was, but an African-American woman a few years ago. And it was right after Black Lives Matter. And she was saying something about racism being a moving target. And I was like, no, it's not. Because it's like, oh, is that racial slur that my uncle said? Is he a racist? It's almost like you're trying to, is the president a racist? Yes, everybody. Yes, absolutely. Racism isn't a moving target. And it's not that I'm trying to, push back on an African-American woman. She obviously should know more about racism. She knows more about the racism and the personal experience of it. But racism isn't something we look up and try to wonder if it's going to land. It actually has landed. We're standing on the foundation of it. Its roots have grown so deep, and it has become what we call the status quo, that we don't even realize the extreme harm that it's doing. That we're content when we hear the health card debate that, oh yeah, those crazy Medicare for all people, or those crazy people who want to privatize everything. Or then there's the combination. At the end of the day, do you want people to have health care or not? Are you playing games with them? Are you trying to keep their diabetes medicine from? Oh, you are. That is embedded in a lack of human dignity and value that only certain people should have access. Healthcare is a public policy and it is a human right. But then you get into affordable housing, and then you get into education. And when you begin to see who has and who doesn't have, and I just talked to you a little bit about that Chinese Exclusion Act. Maybe it's not so overtly said, but when we don't willingly look down on the ground that we stand on, the water that we drink, and recognize that racism is so implanted in all that its tentacles are so deep, that policies, almost all of them, that I can think, at least in that social service, but even our economic policies, who are they benefiting? And we have gotten, I feel like, the poor community that I live in, majority of people of color, already know the system's not for them. Yeah. They're not even trying, or some of them are organizing. But white people are like, oh, I'm so sad that Asian Americans are feeling so badly. Oh, I'm so sad that Black people, are still upset. I'm so sad that, don't be sad. Change the rules. Change the playing field. Rip up the roots and recognize that what we drink and what we are standing on is completely bloodied, and that we need to be willing to pull it up. So I usually say, you have to be willing to be honest about who this benefits. Stop allowing your political allegiance to a party to make you blind to the fact that people are not able to move their lives forward. And so there are policies right now that you can work on in education, in housing, in healthcare, in food security, and we could keep going up almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Food, security, safety. I mean, education comes up a little bit higher, as we continue to move forward to what a human being needs to be able to be their best self. Yeah. And that all plays into it, Michelle. It isn't easy work, but it isn't that much. It's not like hard science. I just don't think people care because the system works for them. And if it works for them, And I think the people it doesn't work for are surviving so much they don't have time to fight for themselves. They're just fighting to stay alive.
Yeah. And something that you've mentioned in the past is just that particularly when it comes to Christians, there's also that extra layer that Christians are often nervous to get into the political square, right? It's easy to say, you know, our thoughts and prayers are with you, or like you said, I feel bad, as if like that is enough. I'm like feeling bad that you're starving or that you're experiencing racism, but there's this clear disconnect between oftentimes our faith and then activism, right, or political engagement. And like, what would you, how would you respond to Christians who are feeling that way, or thinking that we need to keep church and politics or faith and politics separated?
Yeah, well, I've spoken to it a little bit. I think if you're a Christian and you think the system works well, then you must not know any poor people.
Mic drop right there.
Okay, I got nothing more
I mean,
to
that's
say.
powerful. Yes.
I mean, it's the truth. I didn't yell it. I could have, but I didn't. I mean, this isn't speaking on a stage. I'm trying to keep it calm in a podcast. Christ came for the sick. He came for the broken. He came for the poor. And then not only did he come to serve the one at the well, I mean, all of these people that are coming in our minds and the stories that we've heard, but then on the contrast said, it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. I didn't know we would go full circle into how I started, where wealth is a motivator.
Mm-hmm.
It drives public policy because it drives our economy, but it has played into the value of people and the way we perceive them. And Christians are a part of the problem because we don't truly follow the one who valued the poor above all.
Amen.
We're trying to figure out how our camel can get through an eye of a needle.
Mm. That's powerful. That's powerful. Well, I'm grateful for you, Michelle. I'm grateful for your passion for unity, for equity, for fighting for opportunities for all peoples, which include, you know, people of color, marginalized, the Asian Americans included. And I know that there'll be a lot of people that will want to learn more about you. Where can we find you on social media? What, you know, yeah, where can we find you?
I definitely have not done a very good investment. I had a friend tell me, actually, I think somebody who has signed the Asian American statement or was a part of drafting it, said to me that I was all substance and no branding. And I needed to work on my branding because I had good things to say. So
that's true. I agree. You have very good things to say.
You know what? Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm pitiful on Instagram because I'm not only not fun, but I apparently don't take pictures. So, so my name is Michelle Ferrigno Warren. And though I say that because MC, which is my middle name, MCF Warren is my handle. So you can follow me at MCF Warren. Also, you know, you can check out michelleforcolorado.com, which is my website right now. And then I also I'm on Facebook, Michelle Ferrigno Warren. And then I would check out my book. It's, you know, the next book is going to be way better. And it'll definitely be
Is there a next book in the works?
There was supposed to be a next book like a couple years ago, and it was supposed to come out really quickly afterwards, and I was supposed to write it, but there's a lot of things that happen. Honestly,
You're a little busy.
I published the book July 2017. So when you're in somebody who works on public policy around issues of racial justice, and, you know, President Trump is the president, all you're doing is like protection and defense. So we did that for a couple of years. Like, I didn't really have the mental space because of the work that we're doing, but knew that like the power of proximity is good, but the power of resistance is better, you know, and that we don't want to just move from action. We want to move towards activism, and we need to equip the church to know how to do it, because you know what?
Yes.
I am critiquing and actually criticizing the church for not being willing to take their personal convictions to the public square, but I also have recognized that there is so little training on how to do it. And that's the reason some people who will try, and they'll start on social media, and sometimes they'll even start with a statement like yours, that if you don't have a political aptitude, you may really get burned. And people get burned, and politics and religion are like two things that everybody's super sensitive about. I always laugh because I'm in politics and my husband's a pastor. So I figure we are like the least likely to be invited to anybody's dinner table, because we walk in the door. There's politics and religion just walked in, so nobody really likes it. I mean, we got friends that are fighting us over, so don't feel bad for me. But I do think it's funny that if you want to have uncomfortable conversations, invite Dave and I to dinner.
Yeah. Well, you guys are modeling a new way forward, and I'm grateful for that. Well, thank you for this interview, Michelle.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Yeah, thank you just for just the encouragement and the challenge, right? And we need both. We need that prophetic and that pastoral voice in this work of anti-racism and care for all. So grateful for you, Michelle.
Great. Thank you.
Uh-huh.